Complicated. I call it the 101 of divorce. They need an education, not to a level of knowing it like I do, but they certainly need to make educated decisions. And I look to them for the answers. Here's your option. We can do this. Here's how much it's going to cost you. What's the cost benefit here? If you have a man who, let's not say man, if you have someone who's going to pay support and you're talking a $500 a difference month, and we're going to fight that, I do the actual math with them, and I'll sit with them and say, we're fighting this. Could we look at this, like how much it's going to cost you in litigation and time and trial? And, let's see if we can come to a compromise here.
And you must run into, man or woman, again, not to stereotype, somebody who has not worked in 20 years
or
more, and maybe the assets were nothing, and suddenly they're like, oh my God, I'm 54 years old and I got to find a job.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Scary.
There's a lot of traditional marriages here.
Yeah.
That in our community where we live here in Boca. And, it's changing, but I always say, listen, if you get married young or whenever you get married and you're going to give up your career, you got to think about that, because the courts are not awarding support alimony like they used to years ago. And they are expecting you, whether you're 54 or 60, to work. They're going to impute income to you.
Yeah.
And you gave up your career, and you got to take that into consideration.
Yeah, if somebody gave up their career to raise the kids, take care of the house, he was a doctor, he had a gambling problem, he lost it all, now we're divorced, and then he can continue working.
Sure.
Is that factor in? And then it's like, well, she gave it up, so until she can get up to a certain point, he still has to pay?
Absolutely.
That matters.
And you look at the standard of living, you look at what is considered a need versus extras. Somebody has a clothing habit every month of 10 grand, that's probably not a need, right? But there is some allowance for clothing, let's just say as an example. And then they're going to say, what is her capacity for work? And let's say, and I'm saying it's he, she, because women pay alimony as well. I have it both ways. But she can work and she can make X amount of dollars. We have experts that come in and actually do an evaluation, and it's called a vocational exam. And they will basically impute income to the under-earning spouse and offset the alimony need. And then the difference is paid by the one that can pay based on his or her ability.
Most alimony stops when she remarries?
Yes, that would be considered what they call permanent alimony, long-term alimony, and generally, or if they're in supportive financial relationship, that changed.
Right.
So now if you're living with somebody and you don't have as many expenses, you're being, either directly or indirectly provided support, you can offset.
Can he make the case like, listen, she loves him and they're just not marrying because they want me to pay?
Right.
Well, is that a case
happens.
you can make?
You can, yeah. Yeah, but we get really you start digging deep into finances and subpoenaing records and figuring it out. So, I understand it. It seems fair. It seems fair.
All right, we got to take a quick break because we need to take care of our finances, but we will be back. I'm here with Doreen Yaffa, and we're talking about all things love and divorce right after this. And we are back. Are second divorces easier?
I think so.
Is it because they've been through it, or
absolutely?
You do get better at it.
Look, remember we started talking about the unknown.
Right.
Now they know, and so that's maybe why the divorce rate for second-time marriages is higher. I don't know, but they do.
Is it because the fantasy of the happily ever after is gone?
I think so. I think there's more realistic. They're just older, wiser, as we all get in our age.
And I went through it and I survived it, which is a big part of recidivism. If you're talking about criminal activity,
Sure.
They did the time and they survived and they got out. So they're like, part of the scariness of, oh my God, I went to jail for 5 years is gone.
Yeah, yeah.
And so part of the... people look at whether it's dating or relationships as a game of musical chairs, and they don't want to get stuck without a seat. So a lot of times people would rather stay in a bad relationship than no relationship. If they got divorced and then got remarried again, a third time is not nearly as far-fetched as a second time was to them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And how is it changing that the women are paying more alimony and child support than they used to?
I think that... certainly they're better earners now than they were many years ago. So that's all factored into it when you look at support, either child support or alimony. So, I have cases where women are the breadwinners. And I think with the younger generation, even more so. There's a lot of men that stay home and take on that responsibility, and that's okay. It's good,
How often do you run into, how did you ever marry this person?
Oh, but what's that expression? Elephants don't marry giraffes, or giraffes don't marry. You always wonder, like, you see this other person on the other side and you're like, oh, okay, this is really not a good person. How did you even get there?
Right.
But then you start to uncover things about your client. You're like, oh, I see how you guys connected. But sometimes, I had a really sad case where he was absolutely what do they call it? A liar. Pathological liar.
Yeah.
Diagnosed 100%, could fool anybody. And that was a really sad case because she happened to be one of the most amazing women I've ever met. Came from a great family. But he was able to convince her of things that, others couldn't. And he was good at it. But other than that, I think, people generally are just good. Relationships
I think if you walk down the aisle, you are hoping for the best. Or I think the men are. A lot of times the women, he's be a good parent, good provider, all these kinds of things, all the stereotypical things. It's still, she dreams of the house, the dog, the white picket fence. He's not even on that list. But I think when he enters into it, which is why, some very, very wealthy men who have written very big checks for divorce, you see get married for the 5th or 6th time.
They want love.
I think they do. I think they are hoping in the moment, or they're like, if I marry her, she won't leave me.
Yeah.
There's something about like, oh, I'm going to lock her down, and they don't learn their lesson after all that time.
Yeah, we all are just in this world trying to love.
Yeah, I think so too.
And we all want that. That's one of the higher needs, that we all have. So.
Yeah, and even when somebody goes through something incredibly painful and they have been arguing every Tuesday in court for 3 years or whatever, there's a part of them, and that's part of your job, and that's part of our job, and that's part of society's job, is to flame that hope again and have them, because once they can see there's a possibility of, all right, once I get through this, or once I stop thinking about this, or the anger or the sadness subsides, I can start new again, and there's still time to do that.
Look, I have people getting prenuptials that are in their 80s. They found love again. They found companionship.
Right.
And they want to make sure that their estates are secure for their family. Most of them are going to have their trust all in place and all this. They just want to be together. And it's a beautiful thing.
Can you, if somebody dies without a will here, that's different. Every state's different?
Every state's different. Yeah.
And can somebody leave their estate to a dog in this state?
That's a good question. That's not, that's above my pay scale.
I know that's not, but certain states, it's like, the dog has a budget and it's 80% of the will.
Dog custody cases.
Do you?
But dogs in Florida are considered chattel property from the old days, right?
Yeah.
So, we've had drawn out fights about who gets a dog. And the bottom line is you can't have a visitation schedule. You can agree to it separately, but you can't have, the courts won't order that.
They won't. They won't be like, you get the dogs on weekends?
There's case law right on point. One person gets a dog. It's considered property, and that's it. Huh. I know. Hopefully that will change because we all love our fur friends.
Well, 50 years ago, until the 50s, dogs were not in the house.
Right.
This is a fairly new development, and a lot of countries are like that. They're working animals, and they're out and they're cows and horses or whatever. And somewhere time after World War II, we decided to let the dog in the house, and then the dog got in the bed, and the dog was a child.
And then he took over.
And then he takes over. But I didn't think about that dog or cat custody.
Oh yeah. I've had a prenup in which that was one of the issues. I get the dog.
That's got to be tough. And then do they work out visitation, or is that separate in the courts? Just like whatever you want to figure out.
They can. It's just that if you can't agree, the court's going to give the dog to one person.
I've asked some people this who have gotten divorced because somebody had an affair with somebody else.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, is it better if 20 years later they're still with that person? Because on some levels, like, I guess it worked out for them, or the people always were rooting for it to not work out.
No, I don't know.
I think that would make it easier. Where like, I guess they were better together than we were.
have I had those cases? Of course. And you know what? I mean, look, unfortunately, people are unfaithful from time to time. I have to tell you, it's not what I see as one of the major causes. It's really more about financials and a lot about just really communication. I know it sounds so cliche, right?
Right.
But really just not growing together. They're just growing separately. And so you have to work at it.
Right.
You have to really work at your marriage.
Right. They got lazy. They went from husband, wife to mom and dad, and then they grew apart.
And then you get comfortable. And, I say sometimes people spend more time on their financials, like writing checks, or now we do it online, than they do on really working on their relationship every month. And you got to work at it.
Is there a huge rise in divorces when the youngest kid turns 17?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a real thing.
Yeah. That's a real thing because a lot of people have a perception that it's better to stay together, even though it's bad, until the children leave.
Yeah.
I have my own personal opinion on that. I'm
Right.
not a therapist. I'm not into that line of work, but I just think it's a horrible example.
You were very, very young when your parents got divorced.
Yes.
You could you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Is there an age where, I guess every age is tough. They're old enough to understand but not quite old enough to process it.
Right.
That's a pretty big window. What do you remember about it? Just
I remember he took my sister and I out to lunch with her, and I thought, here I am, like probably 4 or 5 almost 5 at the time, and I thought, why am I with this lady? It felt weird to me. It felt not right as a child. Other than that, I don't have a lot of memory of it.
Right.
But I do remember it being something was wrong.
Can you work that out in court? Can she say, he can have visitation or partial custody, but not around her?
The answer is yes and no, right?
It's tough to enforce.
Yeah. So the courts in Florida are very, I hate to use the word liberal, but they're very understanding that both parents get to have our due process constitutional right to have our children and to parent them as we see appropriate. Mm-hmm. And if you chose to have a child with this person, then they get to make some decision on who they're going to expose the child to. So the courts are really reluctant to say no girlfriend or boyfriend around the child unless there's some best interest, like the person is using drugs or just really not a good person. But generally they don't go there. I had a lady today, she's like, well, I don't want him to have the child because he has only one bedroom and he this is a divorce, like a year later, and he has a new girlfriend. The daughter is 8 from the relationship, and the new girlfriend has a child who's 6. And like, where are they going to sleep and all that? I'm like, listen, the courts are going to say he's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
They're 6 and 8. So
does tie go to the mother?
Does what?
A tie. It's like in baseball, the tie goes to the runner.
No.
Does a tie go to the mother?
I don't play baseball.
Okay. If it's
no,
I want the no.
Nuh-uh. That was called the tender year doctrines. That was way when I first started. Primarily moms got children because they presumed that up through the age, I believe it was 2, that the mothers were necessary to care and feed and do all the things, caretaking. That was abolished. That's gone. It's really, many men get more time sharing than women.
They do.
Yeah.
I always
There
thought
are some really great dads out there.
I know, but I thought it was always tough that the court was going to be like that the woman has a lot more wiggle room behaviorally than the man would.
I think that that perception is because it really is a caretaker. Who's been the primary caretaker? And if the mother has been, which typically in many cases is the case, then they will, but it's, look, there's no presumption in Florida 50-50 timesharing. That's a fallacy here. That's not something we do.
Right.
But do the courts look at that? Sure they do. In their own minds.
Well, what do two people do if they're just like, he's the worst father, she's the worst mother?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to cave.
Prove it. You got to prove it to the court because it's best interest. And it's not easy because most of these best interest issues of bad dad, bad mom are done in the privacy of your home.
Yeah. Can the court rule 50-50?
Sure.
So the court can?
Yes.
What if somebody is which again, we're in South Florida, wealthy, they want the custody, but the custody for them means their nanny is going to do their half of the raising.
Yeah,
is that?
That's a good question. I always say that if let's just say it's dad, right? And dad's around and he has somebody that's going to help with the caretaking, As long as he's around and, you know, he's not every night somewhere else, why not? You know, the courts are going to permit that. An extra set of hair